Lay down, buddy. All right. Now that Mateo is seated under my desk, the giant German Shepherd that he is, let's go ahead and get started. So as I mentioned, today's class session is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a little bit more collaborative, interactive. We're going to talk a little bit about essay writing in general, and then we're going to dig in a little bit to the assignments that you guys have due at the end of week 7. You're connecting the past number 1. Now, I do want to address the elephant in the room. You probably have thought to yourself, why did Dr. Essmacher wait until week 7 to do this session? Because we had that short essay due a couple weeks ago. This would have been helpful then. I do it for a couple of reasons. Number one, the short essay is kind of what I call the diagnostic essay. So that way I can kind of get a sense of where your writing skills are already. So where your writing skills are already, that's kind of where I'm at. The other reason is sometimes I can kind of see broad patterns after your first couple of writing assignments of strengths and weaknesses throughout the class. So that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this. And Brian Garcia, I saw you just hopped on. The library orientation was actually at the normal time for your class at 9. So I'll be working on posting that video. If you want to join us on this session on how to write essays, you are more than welcome. But if you were here for the library session for the media analysis paper, we recorded that one at 9. All right. So what we're going to do is first let's talk about essays in general. And then we'll cover some sort of specifics about this one. All right, so first off, how many of you, while I'm working and sharing my screen, raise your hand if you have already taken and completed before this semester English 1301? You've already taken it. Okay, Destiny has. Awesome. Raise your hand if you are currently enrolled in in English 1301. All right, Mary, Ruben, Lavender, awesome. Okay, good. That's the right answer because you're supposed to either have taken English 1301 already or be currently enrolled in it. So let's see. Yes, we'll do that. Awesome. Okay. So can you guys see my screen? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, the writing a history essay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, so you might notice that it's blank. We don't have any other slides besides that because we're going to collaborate. We're going to work together. All right, so let's first cover on our first slide how to write. We'll put how to organize. Bless you. A basic essay. I don't think he can hear me. I think he put on his like super silencing headphones in the other room. Oh, you can. Okay. Sorry, that's Dr. Heverett, the other historian in our class. All right, how to organize a basic essay. Goodness, bless you. All right. So most of you guys are probably familiar with kind of the basics of essay organization. So I'm going to ask you guys, what are some things that every essay should have or need? Like, how do you do like a sort of really super simple basic outline for any essay? Yes, Lavender.
Introduction and conclusion.
Yes, you need an introduction and conclusion. All right. Okay, good. What other parts do you need? Anybody else want to venture forth? What do you need to mention or state in both your introduction and conclusion? A thesis, right. So Mary has said a thesis, right? So is Destiny. So remember, your introduction and conclusion is where you can first introduce your thesis, right, in the introduction, and then the conclusion, this is where you restate it, right? So that way you kind of emphasize and wrap things up all together. All right, so in between, what do we need? Because we can't just have an introduction and conclusion. Those are our pieces of bread in our, what's our filling? Body paragraphs, right? All right, so what's the purpose of a body paragraph? What do we do in a body paragraph? The purpose of an introduction is to kind of introduce our thesis. The purpose of the conclusion is to wrap things up and remind people of the thesis. What's the point of the body paragraphs? Right. So Lavender says, prove or explain your argument. Mary says, address the thesis. You're both right, right? So body paragraph, you want to give with evidence that supports your thesis. Okay, that's where you lay out your argument. And depending upon your essay, you might have different numbers of body paragraphs, right? So this is the basic structure to any essay. How many of you guys, raise your hand, are familiar with the 5-paragraph essay? Yeah, that's a classic. They teach that in a lot of English classes, right? To kind of give you an idea of a really basic essay structure. The 5-paragraph essay looks like this. They just say you should have 3 body paragraphs, right, in the middle. Depending upon your essay or your topic, you might need more. Okay, but generally at least 3 is a good rule of thumb. Now, the essays that you write for history class are likely going to be persuasive essays because you're going to need to stake a claim with your thesis. So let's do a new slide on that. How to, let's see. We'll put persuasive essays and thesis. Can I spell persuasive? And thesis. All right. So a persuasive essay, right? You're trying to convince somebody of an argument that you're making. Now, obviously, for a history class, this might look a little different, right, than something you're writing in English. But let's use a generic example before we get to a historical example to make sure everybody's on the same page for how to do this. All right, so let's say your essay prompt looks something like this. We'll say, discuss discuss the Spider-Man films. And we'll say Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland eras.
You already know Tom Holland's the answer.
Shush you. All right. Okay, so if that's your thesis, right? Like if your professor's saying, like, look at these 3, like, different versions of Spider-Man, probably a good place to start on your thesis would be something like, who is the best Spider-Man, right? So your thesis is not going to be that literal question, right? Who is the best Spider-Man? What would your thesis look like? What would be a potential construction of a thesis for that? So if that's the question you want to answer with your thesis, how might you state your thesis? Anybody want to venture? All right, so Mary says, okay, I could have my thesis, Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man, right? So yes, so that would be at the beginning of a thesis statement, right? So you can say Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man. Now notice that Mary is not saying, in my opinion, Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man, or my personal favorite Spider-Man is Tom Holland. She is declaring fact. Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man. Okay. Now, even though that's her opinion, she doesn't need to state in her essay that that's her opinion, because the whole essay, right, is her opinion and her supporting that argument. Now, that's a good, very basic thesis. How could we make that thesis better? Any ideas on how you could kind of take that start of a thesis and make it a little stronger? If we're going to go with the Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man. Anybody have any ideas? How do you strengthen a basic thesis like that? So we'll put sample thesis. Yes, give reasons why, right? And now you don't have to give away the whole arguments that you're going to make in your body paragraph, but little hints, right, and previews. So you could say, we'll put better sample thesis. Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man because, and then put reasons, right? Obviously putting actual reasons, not just reasons in a bracket. Okay, so that would make your thesis stronger, because think about your thesis like a movie trailer, right? What's the goal of a movie trailer? Like, why do movie trailers exist? What are they supposed to do? To get you to watch the movie, right? So this is where you're going to hook people into your paper, right? Or your professor, right? Reading it. This is where you're going to hook them into it. So the idea is that you want to hook them in, right? You want to give them just a little taste of what you're going to be doing throughout the body paragraphs, right? So just a little hint, a little preview, and then your body paragraphs can go into more detail, right? So in this case, right, you could give different reasons about why you believe Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man. And here's what I want to emphasize. When it comes to Spider-Man, I personally do believe Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man. That's why my husband interjected, because he knows I have a crush on Tom Holland. But if you were writing this essay, right, and I'm reading this essay as your professor, and you truly believed that Tobey Maguire was the best version of Spider-Man, and you argued that, I'm going to judge you based on how well you support that, not whether you agree with me or not. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm looking to see how are you supporting that in your body paragraphs, right? So you could go through and list reasons why you think so-and-so is the perfect Spider-Man, right? And give evidence from, right, the movies and other kinds of things. But what I'm judging you on as your professor, what I'm grading you on is how well do you support your thesis. Raise your hand if you've ever written something and realized after you were done writing it, your thesis didn't exactly match your essay. Anybody ever had that happen? That happens a lot. So don't be afraid to go back and tweak your thesis. Like I say, always start with a thesis. Then after you write it, if you find maybe you went in a slightly different direction, don't be afraid to go back and tweak it. Everybody does that. It's always good to kind of have a starting sort of guideline, but go back and make sure it matches, because that's the other thing that I'm going to be looking at is, okay, your thesis says you're going to do this. Did you do it? Right? Does your thesis match the rest of your essay? Okay. So let's talk about like a generic history example. Oops, but sample history essay and thesis. Okay, so for history, it's going to be a little bit different, right? So sometimes you could have a opinion, right? Like, so something that would be a little bit more opinionated would be like if your essay prompt was discuss who is the best president. Okay. Now, that's something that's a little bit more subjective, right? Like, again, you still have to give evidence, but like I might argue, I don't know, FDR or Teddy Roosevelt, right? You could argue Abraham Lincoln or Ronald Reagan or whatever you want to argue, right? The goal is not necessarily who we're putting forth as our personal opinion, but rather how well we're supporting it. Okay, so that would be an example of more of a sort of opinion. Okay. Then there are other ones that are going to kind of be looking at more concrete fact. So let's say something along the lines of, this is a favorite of Dr. Hevert's, discuss whether the American Revolution was revolutionary. Okay, so in that case, that one's going to be, there's still some level of opinion going on, but it's not as subjective because, again, you're going to kind of look at the evidence. So if we looked at that, because we've just finished covering the American Revolution, right? Let's look at that one. So what do we mean by revolutionary? Because it's important to understand the prompt. What do you mean by that word? Was the revolution revolutionary? What's the basic definition of a revolution? That's why understanding the language of your prompt is important. Anyone want to take a stab? What is a revolution? What does it mean to be revolutionary? When people revolt, right? Okay, so when people rise up. So if we're defining a revolution as that, right, then would you say, raise your hand if you would say, yes, the American Revolution was revolutionary. If we're saying a revolution is just when people revolt. Does it meet that definition? Yeah, okay. So look at the revolutionary as an adjective, though. What does it mean when we say something's revolutionary? That's a little different, right? So what does revolutionary mean as a word? Shh. Joy's trying to interject her thoughts. So when you say something is revolutionary, right? A revolutionary new process or something like that, world changing, right? Lavender's saying world changing, correct. So the idea of revolutionary, right, is that something has significantly changed. Okay, so when we look at the American Revolution like that, what do you guys think? Anybody want to take a stab? Let's look at it both ways. If we say the American Revolution is world changing, what could be some evidence that we put in our body paragraphs to support that thesis? Anybody want to volunteer? What are some things you can think of off the top of your head that would support that thesis? The American Revolution is revolutionary. Don't be shy. All right, sorry, apparently there's something outside my dogs must bark at. So yes, so Lavender is saying one piece of evidence you could put is the first time a common people created the government, right? So this notion of the Constitution and the founding of the United States being a government created by the people, for the people, of the people, right? So you can say, hey, this is really significant. What are some other ways that you could kind of support this, yes, the revolution is revolutionary thesis? Might be some other things that you can think of off the top of your head. So like first time, right, we have a government truly of the people. Any other ideas? I would argue it's the first time we have a successful breakaway of a colony from an empire, right? That's pretty significant. So anybody want to argue the opposite? What would be some evidence if we decided that our thesis was going to be that the American Revolution was not revolutionary? Okay. Can anybody support here? So we already argued the American Revolution was revolutionary because it was the first time a government was created by common people. Okay, so that would be a good example of a pro, yes, it is revolutionary. What would be an example we might say it was not revolutionary? So if we talk about things changing, right? What doesn't really change after the American Revolution? Sorry, I had to yell at Mateo. Yes, so both Lavender and Mary say slavery. So you could say the American Revolution was not revolutionary because They did not abolish slavery. Okay, or you could also say they did not give women, you know, rights and power, right? So in other words, in terms of revolutions, especially if you compare the American Revolution, I'm going to put my world historian hat on here. If you compare the American Revolution to the Haitian Revolution that happens in 1803 and the French Revolution that happens pretty soon after the American Revolution, in both of the revolution, there's far more social change, right? The Haitian Revolution abolished slavery. You guys are going to be reading a little bit more about that shortly in your textbook. The French Revolution, there was radical social change, right? They were chopping off heads of aristocrats and, you know, the king and queen. We didn't have that drastic social change in the United States because of the revolution, right? So you see how you could argue it different ways. You could take like the same prompt and you could argue in completely different directions, just so long as you use evidence to support your thesis. All right. We doing good so far? Raise your hand if you are doing okay, not lost. Any questions? All right. Let's do something a little bit different now. Let's go ahead and pull up Blackboard. Let me pull it up on my screen. So you pull up Blackboard on your screen. I'm going to pull up Blackboard on my screen. Helps if I can find my internet window. I have a bajillion different tabs open. This is challenging. All right, here we go. Okay. So let me go ahead and I'll share mine just with you guys. Let's see, screen number. Yes, okay. All right. So can you guys confirm for me, can you see the Blackboard screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I just picked one class. I have 3 1301s that are the same duration. You guys are all combined together. The instructions are the same. So I just happened to pick section 69. Okay. So if we scroll down, right, to the current week 7, let's go ahead and take a look at the instructions for connecting the past essay 1. All right. Okay. So notice in the directions, right, it's going to give you, it's important to pay attention to the basic directions, right, before we get into the essay. So in this case, you pick one of the prompts. Okay, so only one. Do not write more than one. Do not try to smush them all together into one. It will end badly for you. All right, so pick one of the following prompts. And notice here that on this essay, you have 2 to 4 pages. So if you were somebody who really struggled to hit 2 pages in the short essay, you're okay. You only have to, again, hit 2. If you were somebody who felt that 2 pages was just so hard that you had so much to say, you have a little bit more wiggle room now. Okay, you can go up to 4 pages. Notice that you still have to have works cited page. You still have to have your citation, right, like normal and MLA, APA, or Chicago. So here's the specific instructions for this one, right? Each of the prompts makes use of the primary sources in a relevant chapter. Okay, so it's in the chapter in your textbook. It's the section, if you're having trouble finding it, it's the section in each chapter that's titled Voices of Freedom. So if you're having trouble finding it in the chapter, flip to the table of contents, look for where it says Voices of Freedom for that chapter, and that'll be the pages that is. It says you will be graded on the strength of your argument as well as the evidence used to support your points. For each prompt, you'll be expected to provide basic information from your textbook and other resources you find useful on the relevant topic. So this is a case where definitely use the textbook, definitely use any kind of videos that we've had in class. But if you want to go and do more research on the internet on your topic, you are more than welcome to. Like I said, I'm perfectly happy with outside sources. I encourage you for outside sources. Just make sure you're properly citing them, right? But anything that you feel would help you make a better argument, a stronger argument. All right, so notice that you have 4 different options for essays. Okay, so the first essay is about chapter 1. Second essay is chapter 2. Essay number 3 is chapter 5. Essay number 4 is chapter 6. Okay, so you get to pick one of these. to write on. Would you like to work together to kind of pick apart one of these prompts? Raise your hand if you would like to select one of these and go through it together as a class. All right, awesome. So I'm going to ask you to pull up the chat window, and I'm going to ask you to type in which of these you want. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and we will go with popular demand, which essay you want me to break down. We have a vote for 4, a vote for 2. Mary says 2. 2 is now taking the lead. All right, let's see. Esmeralda and Ruben, I think you guys might have to be the tiebreakers here. We've got 2 votes for 2, 1 vote for 4. What do you guys want, Ruben or Esmeralda? Which essay? 1, 2, 3, or 4?
2.
2?
Yes.
All right, I think Ruben's vote tops it, and Esmeralda's is 4. If we have time, we'll do both. Okay, but right now 2s have it, so we'll do 2. Destiny, did you have a question? I see your hand is still up. Okay, awesome. That sometimes happens. You forget to raise it down. Okay, so let's go over essay number 2. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing for a minute. I'm going to copy paste the instructions for essay 2 into a blank Word document, and then we can work on it. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. I'm going to go ahead and copy paste the instructions. All right. So Esmeralda asked while I'm doing this, are we able to use history.com as a source? Usually my take on that is Wikipedia is not a great common source. Usually my take on history.com is probably not a great idea to trust a network that gives you programs like Ancient Aliens as a valid source of information. But what I have found is history.com is kind of mixed. So yes, you can use history.com, just make sure you're kind of looking at the information, right? To kind of see, is it going to be useful? Is it reputable as a source, right? So work on evaluating the quality of the source. So some things on history.com are a little bit better than others, but yeah. Ancient Aliens is the bane of my existence in my world history classes. Students are like, oh, well, aliens built the Mayan temples. I'm like, no, they didn't. All right, let me go ahead and now share Word. Okay, can you guys confirm for me that you can see the Word document up here?
Yes.
Yes, okay, is the font big enough? Or should I make it bigger?
It's good for me.
Okay, I will make it a little bit bigger just so that how's that? Haha, okay. I'll make it a little bit, actually not that big. This is comically big. We'll make it, there we go. Okay. All right, so here's our prompt. Let's start breaking down our prompt. So what's in bold is kind of the main goal of the essay. Okay. No, I don't need numbers. All right, so what's in bold is the main goal of the essay. So let's read that. Using the Chapter 2 documents, The Trial of Anne Hutchinson and Speech to the Massachusetts General Court, discuss religion in colonial North America during the 17th century. Okay, so here's the main goal of the essay. I'm going to highlight it. And then it basically, this front part here says, make sure that you use these. So I'm going to highlight that in green. Okay, but in yellow, this is the main goal of our essay. We have to talk about religion in the 17th century. Okay, so remember, 17th century means 1600s. Okay, remember the century is already, just add a 1, right? And that's how you get the century. Okay, so when I type to ourselves, main goal, write about religion in the 1600s in the American colonies. Okay, so that's going to be the main goal of our essay, right? Now, the questions that are after this are there to get you to kind of think about some of the things that would be relevant to that topic. So let's look at those. So like that's our main goal, right? We'll get back to that. And we'll think about constructing a thesis in a second. But kind of let's look at the questions first. Did all European settlers in the Americas practice the same religion? So let's answer that question first. So let's break down these questions so we can kind of, whoops. I don't want the numbers. Okay. So we have like 3 kind of sub questions, right? Okay, so let's answer question number 1 first. Yes or no? Did all European settlers in the Americas practice the same religion? Raise your hand if you think yes. All right, Lavender says no. Raise your hand if you agree with Lavender. No. The answer is no. Yeah. Okay, the answer is no. So here we'll put no. All right, now write that in our essay. But the idea of asking that is to get you to think about religious diversity, right? So when your essay, you can kind of incorporate that. That's your opportunity to talk a little bit about what are some of the different religions that are practiced in the colonies. And notice that it says European. Why do you think I chose that word? There's a reason. Anyone want to take a guess at it? By saying European, what am I saying about who you have to talk about?
White people.
Yes, white people, right? Settlers. So in other words, if you look at the documents, what European colonies are these 2 documents from? The Trial of Anne Hutchinson and Speech to Massachusetts General Court. Which European colony is this from? Massachusetts, right. So we're talking about English colonies here. They're both from the colony of Massachusetts. We want to talk about the colonists here, not the natives. So Esmeralda asks, so we give details about different religions, practice, and rituals. Yes, I mean, again, it's only up to 4 pages, so you don't want to go into hyper detail, but you can kind of give some examples about different religions, right? So when we're talking about Europeans here, even though these 2 documents that you're using from the chapter are both about Massachusetts, notice I didn't say just English, right? So that means that you can talk about not only the English, but what other European groups have we looked at? English. Who else was running around colonizing at this time? In the 1600s. The French.
The French.
Who else? Spanish. Germans did colonize, didn't really conquer. So like Germans mostly settled in the English colonies, but that's a good point, Mary, right? Like there is a lot of like German religious refugees going on. That tends to happen more after 1700s, but they're within the English. So English, Spanish, French, and Dutch, right? So this means even though a lot of times when I've assigned this essay before, people see these 2 documents, they're like, oh, they're both from Massachusetts. I'm just going to talk about the English, right? And you could do that, but you also kind of want to strengthen your comparisons by looking at other colonies too. All right, are we good on that one? So this is an opportunity to talk about religious diversity, right, in the colonies. All right, are we ready to move on to the second sub-question? Raise your hand if you're ready. Okay, awesome. All right, so second question, did religious freedom, as we think about it today, exist then? Raise your hand if you think yes. No hand if you think no. Okay, we've got 2 votes, 3 votes for no. Yeah, no. Okay, so again, this is a no. So this question is there to give you an opportunity to talk about that, right? So if they don't have religious freedom, you put what rules do we have around religion? Or how is religion or we'll put church and state related? Okay, so that's an opportunity to get you to talk about church and state. Okay. So if you were to look specifically at the sources, right, mentioned in the instructions, the trial of Anne Hutchinson, and speech to the Massachusetts General Court, both of them are related to that question. Okay, do you remember what is Anne Hutchinson on trial for? Anybody remember? What did she do that got her in trouble? Yes, Lavender.
She started like a whole nother group, kind of started separating herself from the church and was leading other people that way as well.
Yes, so she was a woman leading a spiritual movement and criticizing the Puritan church, right, in the colonies. And so because she was criticizing the church, right, and leading a bunch of other people, and women were not considered eligible for positions of leadership in the Puritan church, they put her on trial. But what's interesting is they put her on trial for sedition. Okay, so Anne Hutchinson is on trial for sedition. Sedition is speaking out against the state. So even though she's criticizing the church, they arrest her and put her on trial for speaking out in a harmful way to the state, the government. Okay, what does that tell you about the relationship between church and state in Massachusetts? Anybody want to take a whack at it? What could we say about the relationship of church and state in Massachusetts? They were really connected, right? Lavender says they're very connected. Same thing as Mary says, right? Okay, so that would be an argument, right, for why religious freedom as we understand it today doesn't exist. Okay, similarly, the speech to Massachusetts General Court, John Winthrop writes that. That one's a little bit of a harder source, so if you choose this question, give yourself some time to work through it. John Winthrop was one of the people who actually was prosecuting Anne Hutchinson in her trial. And John Winthrop there is talking about what he calls natural liberty. I have it still in all caps. Natural liberty versus what he calls moral liberty. Okay, so for him, what he's saying in this is he defines natural liberty as complete freedom. Okay, and then he defines moral liberty as giving people the freedom to only do good things. So for Winthrop, it's possible to be too free. Because if you have complete freedom, yes, you can choose to be good, but you can also choose to be evil. So why not create a state that you pass laws that basically kind of force people to behave? So that's what we call moral liberty. Okay? The idea that we can try to use the political state to regulate behavior. And in this case, this is not necessarily just things like, okay, all religions believe we shouldn't kill people, therefore let's write a law about that. But it also means things like, okay, if Puritans think swearing is bad, let's pass a law banning swearing. Okay, so that would be an example of that. Lavender, did you have a question or you just forgot to lower your hand?
I forgot to lower my hand. Sorry.
It's okay. It happens all the time. All right, so do you see how you could use both of these documents to kind of support you in talking about that particular question? Right, use them as evidence to talk about that. All right, I want to highlight the last question here. Are we good? Can we move on? Do we understand that question? Raise your hand if we're good. Put this in pink. All right, awesome. So, whoops, pink is hard to read. Let's pick a different color. Gray? Sure, gray works. Okay, so the last question of any essay prompt is always the question that asks you to think about how the past connects with the present. So this is very important. I'm going to emphasize this to you. Stuff this into the conclusion. Do not try to answer this in the main body of your essay. Because what ends up happening is a lot of people get tempted to write their entire essay just about this question. Okay, this is not there to do that, right? I'm looking on, do you understand the stuff that we've covered, not just do you understand how it connects to today? So stuff this in the conclusion. How has our understanding of religion changed since the colonial era? Okay. And again, this is where you can bring in different things. If you're like, hey, you know, I think that religion is now a much more personal thing, right? Now that we are completely free to choose whatever religion we want, the state isn't telling us what it is, you can write that. If you wanted to say something about like, we are more tolerant of religious diversity today than they were in this period, you can write that. Okay, so that's a little bit more up to you. That's a little bit more subjective. All right, so knowing this, anybody want to put forth sample thesis? Now we've kind of thought through some of the stuff we can cover. Any idea what would be a sample thesis? What point would you want to make about religion in the colonies? So we've looked at the sub-questions and we said, okay, there's a lot of religious diversity. That even though there's a lot of diversity, right, it's very related. And that definitely our understanding of religion has changed. All right, so Lavender suggests a good one. Okay, she says, religion, okay, and I'll get to yours in a second, Esmeralda. Religion in early America was very controlling. Sorry, I misspelled religion. Very controlling and a huge part of everyday life. Okay, that would be a good thesis that you could back up. Let me go back in and fix religion. All right, so that could be a sample thesis. All right, and then Esmeralda proposes talking a little bit about how much religion has changed and how little involvement it has in government now. So that could be your thesis too, right? You could say something like, so we'll take that and we'll zhuzh it up a little bit. You can say religion, we'll mirror Lavender's wording. Religion in early America was very tied to the government, which is very different to how it is today, right? So those would be some examples of thesis statements you guys can work with. I think those are two great thesis statements. You can roll a lot into your body paragraphs to support that, right? A good thesis statement is not too specific, but also not too vague. So I think these both hit the sweet spots of mentioning specific things, but also allowing you a lot of wiggle room for what you can cover in your body paragraphs. Okay, so as we mentioned again, you can talk about, right, for topics to discuss, we can talk about things like differences. Here, scroll up. Differences between European colonies, right? So if you wanted to make an argument, especially, so both Lavender and Esmeralda's suggestions, right, both talk about government control. What's one European colony that had very little government control? Do you remember which European colonists actually allowed for free private practice of religion? They still had a state religion, but they didn't care what religion you practiced so long as you did it in the privacy of your own home. Pennsylvania is an English colony. So the English colonies, right, all are different depending upon what colony, right? Pennsylvania said, practice whatever religion you want. We're Quakers, it's okay. Massachusetts, right, another English colony was very different, right? It was, you have to only be Puritans. Yes, Lavender's hit at it. The Dutch, right? The Dutch is a European colonial power, allowed the most freedom of religion during this time period. So if you really wanted to kind of hammer home how restrictive Massachusetts is, you could compare it, right, to the Dutch, because they're very different. All right, so you can talk about differences between European colonies. You can talk about relationship between church and state. Okay. what are some other things that have popped into your head about religion and the colonies that might be good to talk about here? Oh, we already talked, I forgot, Esmeralda had mentioned talk about different religions, right? Anybody had any kind of thoughts about things that they could talk about related to religion? Yeah, you could talk about, so Esmeralda says the power it gave men over wives and land. Yeah. So you could talk about religion and what we call patriarchy, right? A patriarchy is a society in which men have the power. Okay. And all of these societies that we're looking at, all of these European societies are patriarchal, right? And again, if you want to talk about that, right, you can really talk about Puritans, right, and why they're so bent out of shape that Anne Hutchinson, a woman, is leading people in religious services. And if you wanted to contrast that, you could talk about Pennsylvania, because you guys mentioned Pennsylvania, right, as being tolerant, and the fact that Quakers saw men and women as equal. Quakers also saw people of different races as equal, right? So again, you can kind of contrast is always a good thing, right? You can say most of the time this was the case, but there's this one group that's a little different. So that's always something that you can do. But yeah, I like that suggestion, Esmeralda. I was gonna say, let's see. You could also talk about the theme, I'm gonna put this in here for y'all, of religious persecution, right? Particularly with the Puritans, that they came to the United States, right? To what is the United States? To flee religious persecution back home in England. And then what did they do in their own colony? Persecuted a bunch of people, including Quakers, right? Your textbook mentions that the Puritans actually would go so far as to either imprison, banish from the colony, or kill people. And it mentions Mary Dyer, right, as a Quaker woman who was actually executed by hanging in Massachusetts because she wasn't Puritan. All right, so you see how we can kind of break down these essay topics. Does this help? Does this help you kind of in breaking down some of the other essay topics? Because we're not going to have time to get to essay number 4. Beautiful. Awesome. So Lavender's like, yes, this helps. And again, where you take this is up to you. Remember, you have 2 to 4 pages to work with. You can't talk about everything and the kitchen sink. Okay, so pick a theme that you want to talk about, okay, that addresses the bulk of these kind of sub-questions. Can we have a copy of this to go by? I'm actually being recorded right now, Esmeralda, so you will have this on video posted to Blackboard as soon as it's done processing on my YouTube channel. So you will have this for reference. You can go back in and look at it. And now I know I'm going to have a bajillion students writing on essay number 2. This happens every time, right? It's the one essay that people pick on. It's like, oh, the professor gave me an example of how to break this down. I'm gonna this is easy, I'll do it. Okay. Yeah, Lavender's like, oh yeah, I'm totally running on this. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop screen sharing and I'll end the recording here.